us?
Well, yes, but I'm in traffic, so it's a bit
Oh dear.
noisy around here.
Okay, all right. So we're gonna make the most of the time that we have together this morning. All right. So this morning we'd like to talk about changing the narrative, owning the conversations, particularly from the youth standpoint. Nigeria's pop culture is changing, is evolving. Before, when people hear pop culture, probably would make reference to the West as popular culture. But Africa's culture is becoming very vocal these days. Obviously, with the breakthrough of Afro music, Afro juju, you name it, a lot of people are beginning to consume African content. So, what ways do you think the Nigerian story can be retold, particularly by this generation of young people?
Yes. Hello.
Yes.
Could you take that again, please? Because it's quite noisy around here, traffic and everything. We're talking about the youth and changing the narrative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So,
yes.
How can we start to change narrative? How can we get the young people to start to speak positively about Nigeria? Their own story. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first issue is that unfortunately the narrative about youth is often what's been sort of passed down to us. I mean, it all was in our radio programs. So that's just it.
So we have to start changing narrative by redefining what our popular culture is.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you. Now, we met last week in a great conference. It was very informative. Now, there was something you shared that I think a lot of people need to also get to hear. Now, you are Nigerian, obviously, but from the way you sound, a lot of people probably go, is this one just coming back from abroad? Quickly, can you tell the public exactly what your story is and how come you're still here in Nigeria? I say still because we heard you had been abroad. So what's the story around that?
Can you repeat that?
What's the story, your personal story as regarding, wanting to speak Nigerian, speak more African and tell the African story? We met last week, yes.
Yeah, I said it rather briefly, because it's a rather changing childhood memory. But, when people talk about racism in the abstract, some of us who have actually experienced it, it's rather painful. I shared that story that, as a child growing up, you're always called names like Bollywood, that go back to Africa and sing for trees and making monkey noises, even being chased by dogs on my way to school, and then getting into a math class and then a math teacher telling the students that, this monkey can actually do mathematics and he's got a brain, and encouraging the students to start making monkey noises. I think my dislike of mathematics started from that. And then, I sort of got into it, all of us did, because I remember once asking my father whether they actually had houses in Africa, whether they had roads, whether they had electricity, whether they even had chocolates. And when he said yes, they had all those things, it was like, I was so shocked and surprised. And then I think eventually my father had enough and then told all of us that we were coming back to Nigeria on a holiday. And we were happy. After 2-3 months, he didn't let us come back and said, you're not coming back until you've got your first degree. So really, it's something, because when you're there, apart from the racism, you're also turned to Africa. So I think that eventually when they were doing, I went from that people, and that we just everyone did. So, it was a real eye-opener for me. Like the conference was titled Reimagine Africa. And what had been sent down over hundreds of years of, racism and all that.
Now, it's interesting that, you just described your experience in the UK, where a lot of people, to today, we still have a lot of people who are still trying to get to Japa. They want to get Yeah, they want to get to the UK. People want to sound like them, to speak a Cockney accent, in the Liverpoolian accent. It's a thing. December is a few hours away. We're going to be inundated very shortly at the airports and in our streets with the "I just got back" gang. The people who have spent time in the US, in the UK, and they're coming home for Christmas, and then they are going to they want to let you know that they traveled abroad, and they are going to sound like the Brits, on all the Mayfairs and all the other streets. And these are Nigerians. And then you have to ask yourself, if they are speaking like that, how then can anybody want to sound as original as Nigerians do sound?
Well, the thing is, first of all, is that we have to accept that accents alone don't make you a Nigerian, an American, or whatever it is. Everybody has different stories. It's an accident of birth or something that some people speak the way they do. I remember when I was younger, people used to make fun of me about, the way I spoke. It got so bad that I was supposed to speak in public. Until one day I said to my dad, I wish I could speak like everyone else. And my father said, don't worry about it. One of these days, the way you speak will open doors for you. So I really don't buy into the idea that accents really make you a better person. But then, people use those accents to sort of let people know that they're somewhere and they've done things and all that. But I just think that an accent really means that it reflects where you've been, where you were brought up. So it's not really that important. But back to the issue about people feeling superior because they've traveled or they have, it's all in the mind, really. And I think the idea that a lot of people are coming back is because they think that they have something to offer, the country. So, I really don't think that much about whether people do that or not. And I think a lot of people are trying to identify with them now. It becomes fashionable to say that you have Nigerian roots or Kenyan or Tanzanian roots. When they come home, we also to give themselves a...
Oh dear. Okay, we're going to get back to our guest shortly. Let's go on a break. We're talking about Africa's and Nigeria's pop culture. How you as a youth can start to change the story and speak what you think or what you know is officially and authentically Nigerian.
Nigeria Info. Right back after this.
Being a new artist in the game. Mastering your riffs.
on that Nigerians must tell their own stories and talk up the country as part of their contributions to nation building. Now, whilst emphasizing the importance of storytelling, the President stated that stories told by others were often with agendas and urged Nigerians not to speak ill of the country. Welcome back to Hello Port Harcourt, this Wednesday program. I'm very pleased that my guest, whom we were speaking to over the telephone, has magically appeared and is sat beside us in the studio. Margaret Ukwu, good morning to you.
Good morning, Jude.
Okay, you can catch your breath now. Here we go.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Now over the telephone, and I got a few responses when you made that comment. Mm-hmm. You said, when you were in the UK as a younger child, mm-hmm. you experienced racism, and this wasn't in 1955 or 1970s or 80s or 90s, or was it early 90s or thereabout?
Well, it was back then. It was back then, but it was. Back then, around the 80s and beyond. Yes. Yeah. Because in the 60s, 70s, 80s, racism was overt over there. It was overt. They didn't hide it. In the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they were quite clear and vociferous. Power was the man of the moment, and they were quite vociferous about it. Not like now when they're a bit more covert. Yes. But it still exists.
It still exists. All right. So racism does exist. You experienced that. It was traumatic for you as a child, and that's one of the reasons why you decide you have to speak the story from an African perspective, as an African, as a Nigerian, and tell stories. Now you've dedicated yourself, to speaking to youths, to encouraging them, to mentoring them, to advising them. You work as a counselor and an advisor. And this idea of pop culture, the Nigerian pop culture now, is so broad that it's now becoming acceptable on the international stage. Everybody knows about African music and everything, but is it still enough for us to tell our story? Is that all we are right now?
Well, actually, pop culture is globalization. It's a globalized thing. It fits into the global agenda. So I wouldn't really say that our music tells our stories. It just tells an aspect of our lifestyle. There's so many other ways we can tell our stories. Nollywood had done that in the films that it produced at that time. The stories it told and gave Africans in the diaspora and our brothers who have sort of relocated a sense of worth, because over there, people had the impression that they didn't have roads, they didn't have electricity and all that. So seeing those things in Nollywood films gave them that sense of pride. In fact, the Jamaicans and the African Americans were the biggest consumers of Nollywood films, even bigger than Nigerians, because they kept saying that, look, the white man lied to us. He told us that Africa was one big miserable pot of suffering and all that. And look at people even looking better than us. Of course, after a while, we realized that Nollywood was in its own way romanticizing Africa, because we have more than one facet of. In fact, we have hundreds of stories. And I've had lots of people saying that, okay, yes, fine, we talk about our culture, but that's not us. That's not me. Aisha Sise did have to make that comment some time ago on Inside Africa, saying that every time she watched things about Africa, she didn't recognize herself there. Wow. Because we're so many, Africa has hundreds of thousands of ethnic nationalities. True. And even you and I sitting here have different stories. Our own lifestyles are different. So, pop culture only shows an aspect. It doesn't show everything. But the important thing is as many aspects of Africa are shown to the world as possible.
All right. So how do you get young people now who come and meet you? For example, you are an educational advisor. Excuse me, madam, I'm confused. I want to do this. How do you then help them to have their voices heard? Using obviously what everybody is these days, social media and whatever media, whether it's print or it's TV or radio. How do you get a young person to not, as it were, repeat the same narrative, the in quote pop culture? How do you encourage them to be individualistic?
It's difficult because when you're young, you'd rather be popular than wise. You'd rather want to fit in than stand out. So pop culture is that. Everybody wants, if something is in vogue, everybody does the same thing. We wear the same jeans, do the same makeup and all that. You don't want to be different. So you can't really encourage individuality when somebody is young. I mean, when you're in school and you're intelligent, there's a stereotype of the brainy loner.
Yeah.
And the popular sportsman and the athlete. So, it's difficult for a young person, especially
those are stereotypes. Those are archetypes.
Because it's there. I mean, all of us when they're in school, everybody would mock you and all that. So, but the important thing is that young people are also creative. Within that popular thing, still find your own space. And you try and encourage them as much as possible to do that. It's kind of difficult as well because sometimes they're not allowed to express themselves. We live in a society where you're told that you have to wait your turn. Young people have to respect their elders. And by the time they're able to get there, the elders don't ever want to give way. They keep going on and on and on. So you have a situation that a youth might be somebody well into their 50s.
Yes. It's funny as it sounds.
It's funny
as it sounds. True. Yeah, it is true. Okay. Now, once I engage in you, some of you started sending your questions and comments here. This one, we're talking about pop culture, particularly from the Nigerian aspect. How can get Nigerian youths in particular to start to express themselves in a positive way, to own their story, to change narrative. Still on Still says, my brother, you and I know that there is no new story to tell about Nigeria, and even all over the world, all stories are now history. So let's get to the phone lines, all right? I will get Margaret to respond to that. 0817-923-0002, 0817-923-0003, 0817-923-0002, 0817-923-0003. All right, at Nigeria Info PH, at Nigeria Info PH is where you find us on Facebook and on X. That's Twitter. At Nigeria Info PH, at Nigeria Info PH. All right, let's start with this. Still believes, Margaret, that there's no new story. It's all history all over the world. What do we have to tell? What do Nigerians have to change? Why do we have to own a narrative?
First of all, you have to ask him, whose story is he calling its all story? His story, her story, their story, our story. Whatever he's saying is that whatever story it is someone who controls the narrative. And history, in academic terms, they say, is often dictated by the victor. You have a victor's story that is often told. But now what we're trying to change is that it's no longer the victor's story, but it is our own story, be it the stories of the past, because knowing the stories of the past help you understand your present and define your future. Bob Marley did say that if you don't know your past, you can't know your future. And that is just the truth of it. And more often than not, most of the histories that have been told have suppressed the pasts of the people they want to dominate.
You suppress the past
of the people they want. Look at, for instance, the River Niger. Mungo Park, they said, discovered the River Niger. It suppressed the truth that the River Niger had been a part of people's lives for thousands of years.
Yes.
So that's just it.
So he didn't discover anything.
He didn't discover anything. So then, would you say that history is right or accurate? He might have discovered it for the white man, but they didn't discover it for the Guineans, didn't discover it for the Nigerians. So
yeah, I see your point there.
So really, when you talk about history, it is that you have to study history properly to understand your own place in it. The African person has the problem today because we do not really understand or own our own history. Our history has been defined by other people. And even now that people are coming up to define Africa's history, we're making a lot of mistakes. For instance, we have the problem in Egypt right now, where African Americans decided to say that Cleopatra was an African. And history tells us that Cleopatra actually wasn't an African. She was of the Greek lineage, but overthrew the original African dynasty. So the Egyptians have taken Netflix to court. So you see that if you don't really know your history, it can be told by anybody.
It's a difficult thing to start to define, what your history is. But then, I agree with you. Getting to know the history will definitely help you to understand the present, and hopefully you can start to rewrite history rewrite the stories for the future, which is what you are interested in. You want to get young people to start to speak positively, have a narrative of their own, right, that represents what they are actually experiencing at the moment. Now, Clement is on the line. Clement is speaking to us from GR. You can put on your headset so you can get to listen to Clement as well. Let's say hello to Clement and have him join the conversation. Clement, good morning to you. Welcome to Hello Port Harcourt.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Dan.
Good morning.
Hello, Port Harcourt.
Hello, Port Harcourt.
Well, I called because for this, we don't have, is it updated here? It is the old one we have. I think I beg to differ.
Okay.
Because the histories are made in Nigeria, especially if you are in cultural environment. What I mean cultural environment is a traditional environment. My issue with that is each of the, would I say, culture or let me use the palace, the local palace that was the community in our environment, right? Supposed to have somebody that has that history.
So sorry, Clement, could you call back? That line's not very clear. Sure. Yeah, so we're having a bit of a challenge to understand. Reality, I've never seen myself or someone I aspire to be in any Nollywood movie, and those that are written, directed, and produced by Nigerians. Oyibo folks are not always the problem. Despite my living in the UK full-time for many years, I have never experienced racism. Yet, I have had tribalism directed at me in Nigeria. So he said the former vice president Yusuf Banjo had no right whatsoever to dictate the story of any Nigerian apart from himself and his household. That's what he should be telling. Okay, Clement is back. I'll get you to talk about this because I think there is some. There are one or 2 points I have picked up from this. Clement, can you hear us? And let's see if your line is better now. Apologies.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Very quickly, please. Let's hear your comment.
Okay.
Oh dear. Oh dear, Clement. It seems to be the gods are not on your side today. But Margaret, let's take apart this message. All right. Now it's true. Africa has so many stories, like you alluded to.
Yes.
All right. And in quote, the African story can be complete because there's so many of them. So many. Yeah. And then she said, in her own case, she lived in the UK for years, never experienced racism. That's her reality.
Yeah, I don't argue with, in fact, the point that she did make after that when she said that, in fact, she'd experienced tribalism. Many years ago, there was a poem I wrote, and it was titled Why I Want to Return to the UK. And I described my experience of racism, but then also described my experience here, where I'm discriminated against on the basis of religion, ethnicity, gender, in different places. Yes, because you find it. Even if people belong to the same ethnic group, they start saying upland, downland, eastland, southland, and all that. And then somebody will relate to you. I brought that up the other time. There's all sorts of ethnicity, the religious bias. Like I said, ageism. If you're young, you can't do this until you get to a certain age and all that. So there's so many different barriers that you face that sometimes racism is the easiest thing to face. At least the only thing, as I ended that poem, the only thing they'll have against me is that I'm black. I wrote that poem many years ago because of what I was subjected to. I mean, you come back, like I said, you'd come back from the UK, you have an accent, they start laughing at you, they start making fun of you. You find that you suddenly find out that, if you're not this religion, even if you're Christian, if you're not Anglican, if you're not Catholic, if you're not this, if you're not that, there's so many different paths you have to traverse. So as I said, like she said, and I keep saying to everybody's reality is different. When you watch Nollywood films, first of all, I don't watch a film to recognize myself in it. But what I was talking about was that the image it portrayed to those who have not ever seen Africa is different. And then when we do talk about Nollywood films, there are other technical things we go into about them, how they try to conform to what somebody else says should be on the films. So some of the Nollywood films are almost like rehashed, pale imitations of what you see in the West, because it's still the story that they're telling us. They come in there, you don't recognize yourself. But we do also have that problem, because while we keep shouting about racism, we have lots and lots of isms here.
Isms, right?
That we don't even talk about in our films. The sooner we start talking about those isms, the easier it will be for us to tell our own stories. But we don't. We don't really talk about those isms. We pretend, the white man is so bad with racism. But you go down the street and you hear all sorts of slur words used against somebody who outside you say is black, but he's this, he's that, he's that, he's that. And most of the problems we have in Nigeria today are not of racism, but of the isms that we have created for ourselves.
Most of the problems in Nigeria are the isms that we have created for ourselves. We will have to continue this conversation. Probably we'll make another appointment to get to speak with you next week if you can afford to. There's a lot that this conversation is going to bring forth, and I don't think we have done justice to it. Talking about the pop culture, how you can change narrative, we haven't even scratched it. But yes, some questions have been raised. What isms are you experiencing right now as a Nigerian? Anonymous said, well, tribalism. That's what she experienced. That's her reality. What's yours? But like my guest is trying to go through life this period to let you as a young person know you have a choice to speak your own truth. Margaret, Ukwu, thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully next week we'll have a chance to have you earlier so we can have time to have more discussions on this subject matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll pack our bus today. We're going to be leaving you shortly. We have adverts coming through. The news comes up your way, and then the sunny side of conversations will be on your way. The fufu bender, the very last fufu bender is coming your way. Talking about Dennis. Stay tuned.